Hello and welcome to Writers and Books. My name is Kathy Zepna. I'm the Communications Associate here. For those of you who are new to us, Writers and Books is a literary arts nonprofit center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, a bookstore, literary programming for people of literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. You can find more information at our website, wab.org. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the Keeper of the Western Door. We're so happy to have Stephen Schottenfeld with us today. First, we'll hear him read, then he'll be in conversation with Joanna Scott, followed by a Q&A. Joanna Scott is the author of 10 novels, including The Mannequin, a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Her awards include a MacArthur Fellowship, a Lawton Literary Award, and a Gunningham Fellowship. She is the Roswell Smith Burroughs Professor of English at the University of Rochester. This Room is Made of Noise is a quietly mesmerizing novel existing in the liminal spaces between altruism and greed, deftly exploring the shades of gray that lie between our desires and our demons. Stephen Schottenfeld, Associate Professor of English at the University of Rochester, is the author of Bluff City Pawn. His stories have appeared in the Gettysburg Review, the New England Review, the Virginia Quarterly Review, and elsewhere. Thank you and enjoy.
Can you hear okay, or should I manipulate this? It's the way that
You can turn it upwards.
turn it up. How's that? That's good?
Yeah.
Very technologically proficient. It's so good to be here. Kathy, a former student, you didn't say that. So, Kathy and Olivia, two star students. I always think of Writers and Books as a place that when I first got to Rochester, it was one of the first places that kind of got me out of the U of R and got me meeting folks in the community, meeting people who taught at other institutions or just wrote and lived here. And I'll always be thankful about that. And I kind of see some people that I'm remembering that if I didn't quite meet them at an event here, I sort of met them because of an event here. Like you, Al, yeah. And now I'm reading a book that's set in Rochester, which is I've read a few times here, but I've never done that. So here goes a book that's set in Rochester. It's called This Room is Made of Noise, and I'm happy to talk about that title at some point if you want. I'll just read you the epigraph. I'm going to read. Yeah, for like a little over 20 minutes, which will not take you to the end of the first chapter, but it will take you to hopefully a point where you feel like you are understanding something that is unfolding between these two people. The epigraph is, it's by Gina Burial, and it's from a story of hers called Women in Their Beds. And the line that jumped out at me when I read that story was, on your way back into life, do you fit yourself into who you were always expected to be for a safe return? So here is This Room is Made of Noise. I was driving past the big houses on Thomas Avenue when I caught across the street these pretty shades glowing in a window. A 12-light table lamp, a Tiffany lily, it looked like, but a copycat, I was sure. I'm no guru of lamps. I started buying and selling them recently, a little side business to help with the hole I dug. But I figured that's what I was only seeing. Valuable nonetheless, and I reversed direction and swung my van up the driveway to try to acquire what wasn't real. There was an old lady in the front room seated in an armchair, and when I rang the bell, I waited a full 5 minutes till she got up and made her way over. The loud talk inside was the TV. I heard the lock unlatch and then the door opened slowly. She was 90 plus maybe. younger than the lamp if it were genuine. "Hello," I said, holding the screen, and she repeated the greeting, but it sounded more like, "Oh," like an echo of what I'd said. I asked about the lamp in the front window, whether it was for sale. She shook her head. "Too bad," I said. "I was going to offer you 800 for it." Then her small eyes brightened and she pointed her finger at me and said, "Sold." She cackled like hell. I want to be clear that 800 is not a lowball offer for a Tiffany reproduction. I asked if I could inspect the lamp first before making a purchase. "My guest," she said. She flicked her hand in an invitation. I entered the house and followed behind her bent body. She didn't use a walker or a cane, but every step was thoughtful and assessed, her hands touching the backs of furniture and the surface of an end table for support, her foot carefully lifting off the ground and onto the area rug so as not to drag and trip, which made me conscious of my eager feet charging forward. She stopped in the middle of the room. "Over there," she said, and I maneuvered around her, orderly and restrained, hiding my energy as I went past for the lamp. She stepped to her chair and positioned herself not to stumble. I heard the TV shut off. The clicker tapped against the plate. I watched her wobble before dropping back onto the cushion. Her chair was padded with back pillows. I do a lot of work for the elderly, and there are times when I feel not just sorry for their condition, but also lonely for how my life might end up, captive, my body frail and shutting down, everything difficult. Certain customers, I felt like I was abandoning them after I got paid and left. But the lamp. The Tiffany stamp was on the base, but I figured the other company name had been soldered off, and what I was seeing was just fake marks. I learned this the hard way when I took a mushroom lamp that said Tiffany to the antiques dealer, and he explained that I was looking at a lookalike. "Sorry to break your bubble," he said, "but 99 out of 100 are reproductions." I studied the condition of the lilies. The shades had a nice silky feel. "It was my father's," I heard her say, and my mind couldn't think of an appropriate response, how to comment or be nice without making a mistake. Nodding seemed enough. "He didn't want to give it to me," she said. She pressed her thumb hard against the arm of the chair, which I guess meant that he was tough and cruel, that he put the screws to her, which was good. I mean, not about his treatment, but her sentiment that she wanted the heirloom lamp and even the memory out of her house. "My dad's like that," I said, and it was mostly true. "Bossy," she said. We nodded agreement. "I was supposed to be a boy," she said. The metalwork and patina looked good. I told her I'd be right back, and she said, "Ha, ha, ha." And I realized I was turned sideways and she'd probably faked hearing, so I faced her directly to communicate. "I just need to go to the bank," I said louder, and she replied, "Good idea." I went home for a box and some packing paper, then to the ATM and came back with the cash. "Remember me?" I said, and she smiled at my return. "The lamp man," she said in a commanding voice, and I was maybe surprised for being 90 or beyond and not needing reminding. I was happy that I'd been recognized and didn't have to explain myself and start over as a stranger with the price. "The lamp man," I smiled back, like it was my new name and our private joke. We stood in the vestibule together. I handed her the money, but she told me to put it on the nearby dresser, which I did, on top of a mess of papers and mail. "I'm putting it right here," I said. She looked over at the clutter and rolled her eyes. "I have enough bills to wallpaper the world." I walked across the unvacuumed rug, busied myself with the lamp. First, I switched it off. For some reason, I thought back to the rug, how it was too thick for her stiff steps, and that she might want to replace it with a thinner one so she could step more easily, or better yet, shift the braided one away from the walking lane. "My nickname is Slow Motion," she said. She was moving toward her chair, halfway there, She had already stepped across the uneven ground, and if she looked at me, I would have smiled, but she was focused on her feet. So, back to the object. I removed the shades, wrapped them in paper, and nested them in the box like a dozen baby birds. I unscrewed the lights, quick twists on the still hot bulbs, and set them on the paper. Hurt yourself, she said, and I knew what she meant. Don't burn. She reached the chair, teetered before falling in. The TV noise went quiet. Her plate still held some leftover scraps, a squeezed ball of aluminum foil. She sat in her chair the way my grandmother did when I'd visit her, crumpled up and reduced, and I felt like I was supposed to talk while taking what I'd paid for. But I didn't want to linger, and I needed to concentrate on this fragile thing. If he has a job and he doesn't beat you, you can marry him. I turned to see a finger shaking. Then she nodded at me, sure that I understood the meaning. I tried to decipher where she'd looped back to. My mind grasped nothing. What? I said. My father. She looked surprised, almost bothered by my confusion over her out-of-the-blue thought. Her voice tremored, but I hadn't heard enough of her to know if this was emotion or just regular speech. Said that. Oh, I nodded as if I'd missed the beginning, then gestured at the lamp as if it were the reason for my forgetting and for not saying more. I removed the last bulb. But my husband wasn't like that at all. Jim was the pick of the litter. There were pictures on the mantle, years and years of their marriage, the young faces of the wedding, next at middle age, then recently old. But I didn't ask how long it had been only her. I didn't notice any photos of children, so maybe it was just them alone together the entire time, if you don't count pets. And she had pictures of dogs, but mostly cats, although I hadn't detected any presence now, no sounds or sheddings or worse or beak. I pulled the plug, freed the cord from the wall socket. I took the base and wrapped it in a protective sleeve of paper and set it gently atop the other bundles. All finished. I'm weighing stakes in the basement, she said. The line felt less cryptic, or maybe I was just getting used to her skipping thoughts. Your husband, I guessed, at the subject. No, she corrected, laughing. My father. And I laughed too over not telling the difference. He owned a tavern. He was always in the basement. When there was trouble, when there was a fight, when there was something bad, no one could find him, weighing stakes. That's what we said about him when he was never around. I liked the story, and it seems safe to hear now. Plus, it reminded me somehow of my ex-wife's father, his saying, you can't make chicken soup from chicken shit. I used to laugh about it with Renee, only when we started fighting, when we got near to separating, she said it about me. I didn't want to remember it anymore, but I also wanted to be friendly here. Still, it felt wrong to repeat the swear. I tried to think of other talk. But you're right, she said, it was a joke between me and Jim. Since the divorce, Renee still says it, only shorter, just the curse, chicken shit. Actually, that's not true. We've stopped talking, so the words are just in my head. I gathered up the box and nodded, leaving, and carried the contents across the room, moving closer to her, then away. The box, it wasn't one of the boxes I had used when I moved out, but I guess the association, box, house, was there. Only this time I hoped I was going somewhere good. Goodbye, I heard her say from behind. I turned back. Her hand was in the air. I said the same, and I told her I'd get the door. You can handle that, she said, and I glanced at the big chair anchoring her body, and I wasn't sure if she meant a statement or a question. Outside, I propped the box against the house to pull the door shut. I reached my van, moving normal, but because of her, it felt like a hurry. The dealer buzzed me in, and I set the lamp, which I'd reassembled, on the counter. But instead of a quick dismissal, he purchased it, but only after knocking it down as common. He showed a greater interest by staying silent. This was a first. He detached one of the lilies from the stem, held it in his hand. Then he walked it over to the window, which he'd never done with a replica. And I watched him study the pigment in the better light. He didn't shake his head. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was sure I'd missed something, and I stopped thinking about a minimum offer. Good color, he said, after he'd scrutinized all 12 lilies, and my mind climbed steeply. I added a digit to the worth. He turned over the base and nodded at the number as if he were identifying it, authenticating it in his mind. He looked at the porcelain sockets, and then he screwed back the bulbs. There were some chips in the upper rim, but the damage disappeared when you reset the shades onto the stems. He plugged in the lamp. He tested the switch to see if the settings functioned. I watched the 12 lights turn half on, half off, then all on, all off, a full working circuit. It was a fun electrical pattern, clusters of lights blinking bright and dark like strands on a Christmas tree. Where did you get this? He asked, and I told him it was a family lamp. I didn't tell him what family. I figured he was just seeing if I got it at auction. It's funny because I heard myself, or even her, the two of us replaying the lamp man like a shared language. When he said the thing about 99% of Tiffany's being fakes, he added that I got the one. What are you looking to get out of this lamp? He said, and I joked the max. I watched him manage a smile. Anybody else look at this? A female antiquer with artificial hair glanced up from her browsing. She frowned, jealous, as if the collection of vases in front of her just switched from treasure to trinkets. I wasn't sure what the right answer was, so I said yes. When he asked me who, I confessed nobody, but it didn't matter. He shrugged. He didn't mind that I'd been caught in a cheap lie because the lamp was telling only a rich truth. Are you prepared to sell it now? When I said yes, he said, I'm prepared to give you $15,000. He was a tiny man, but when he said that figure, well, his personality got very big. And I increased with him. I didn't even make a counteroffer because he'd already said so much more than the double I'd originally hoped to clear. He suggested splitting his payment into 2 checks, the second one post-dated to avoid a tax hit on a $10,000 transaction, which sounded sneaky and sensible. Maybe the payment terms made me assess what was hers and what was mine, because instead of keeping all the money, which believe me, I felt like doing, 15,000 changes your life for a while, although it would have, if not for the mistake I'd made earlier this year. It was just after the separation, when maybe my head was messed up a bit, I'd gotten discombobulated because I forgot to make an insurance payment, which had never happened before. And then, of course, bad luck happened, a roof leak, some error at the ridge, and of course, the homeowner had renovated their attic so the water could damage every expensive thing. A $20,000 claim. I didn't even know I'd let my insurance lapse, and it wasn't like I'd ever needed anyone or Renee to remind me to pay my insurance, not saying I was like clockwork, but I always got the check in the mail on time. But I think the problem was that I'd always written the checks when I was living in one place and I wasn't there anymore. So I didn't have that reminder. I almost felt like Renee had conspired with this wife, the client with the bad roof and a good lawyer, devised some alimony payment, which I hadn't had to make because the kids, Renee's, weren't mine. It was pointless to curse anyone but myself. That roof, I'd probably done 10 jobs on that day and 100 while I was driving around uninsured. But the one job that went bad was the worst payout I could have imagined. It was like the same odds as the Tiffany lamp being real. Almost called my dad to ask for cash, which would have been childish. Here I am, such a middle-aged kid, so I didn't. Just took on extra work and added the side business of buying and selling. Anyway, the lamp. I calculated a sizable profit, took 5 for myself, which finally finished the debt and put me in the plus column barely, although I still couldn't spring for a newer van, and I wasn't about to strain my resources to rent a better apartment. and brought the bigger share back. I've knocked on doors a bunch. I can clear those leaves from your gutters. Miss, you've got little trees growing out of them, but never to deliver 10 grand. At her doorstep, I felt hesitant and generous. There was a part of me, I confess, that wondered if I should have banked the upper number or even divided it half and half. But another part was excited, kind of giddy, to show her what happened. Look what I did with your lamp, I was thinking. Look what I turned it into. The door opened faster, although she might have remembered my van, which is all lettered up. Or maybe she'd been up already, waiting to greet the mailman, like my older customers sometimes do. I fanned out the money like sweepstakes. Here again and again, I said. I showed her the $1,000 stacks and started explaining the transaction, how I was returning a large sum because I had undervalued the worth, the reason being, and I stumbled over my words as if making a bad pitch for a repair job, that I thought her lamp was imitation. Imitation, she asked. I tried talking simpler. A fake. A fake, she shouted. She sounded almost strangled. Why would it be that? It's a lamp. Her eyes bugged out in alarm. I tried to clarify that names get erased and replaced with the Tiffany signature, that I wasn't insulting her or her possessions, but speaking of the 1 in 100 ratio of real antiques. I shook the bundle again to signal there was no reason to be upset. Well, come in, she said, and left the doorway. And because I'd felt scolded about the lamp, which wasn't hers anymore, and because I was still holding the money, which was, I followed. The money, the 800, from before, was still right there on the table, only now peeking out of an unlicked envelope, which hardly seemed like theft prevention. I wanted to tell her to stow it away safer, that somebody could take that, but it wasn't really my business to interfere. Instead, I placed the bundle beside it. The unevenness of the stacks against the envelope made me think again that I should have taken more from the total, that it was a mistake to bring this extra money to someone already wealthy. Then I reminded myself that I pocketed over 4 grand, which still felt like a big winning bet, and I was happy again. And she was too. She said, look at that. And I did. We both beamed, but then I realized the room was dimmer. The lamp was gone. Of course it was. I bought it and took it out and exchanged it for a cash windfall. But it was still strange to see it not there, and stranger to think about what was missing from a house, from a person I hardly knew. A good part of the room was now dark. There was just an unreachable overhead with burned out bulbs and then a floor lamp throwing a weak light. I treated her house like a shop window. I almost regretted turning the lamp into cash. 10 grand was useless to her. I wished 2 things: that I had kept all the money and then I had brought back the lamp. Do you have another lamp? My voice sounded apologetic. We'd be rich, she said. But I only meant to bring down from the attic, not for cashing in valuables. I gestured at the poor lighting. I watched her squint at the only light. We were both silent, and that's when I heard a plumbing noise. Do you have water running? Water? I can hear a sink, I said. A toilet, maybe? She concentrated. I can't hear anything, she said. And I glanced at her hearing aids. I can't hear stones. Is there a bathroom downstairs? Why, yes. Would you like me to inspect the problem? I explained that I was a handyman. To the bathroom we go. A finger saluted the air. I will lead the way. We walked deeper into the house, past inner rooms, and I watched the effort of her slow steps navigating the hallway as if we were taking a long uphill route. Her hand balanced on the wall. When she appeared to stumble, my hand reached for her elbow, but she righted herself before I made contact. Still, I thought about the need for a rail. The noise hissed louder. She nudged the bathroom door open and entered the room. She leaned against the sink counter. I lifted the tank lid, set it down on the seat. The water level was low. Easy diagnosis, a leaky flapper. "What is the matter?" she asked. I crouched down to shut off the water. "Your flapper is defective." "Oh my." "This won't take but a moment." I flushed the toilet, then I unhooked the chain from the handle, removed the bad flapper. I dropped it in the small trash bin. My fingers were wet and black from the grime beneath the valve and from circling and scraping away the grit on the valve seat. She offered me a hand towel from the rack, but I just wiped the gunk and deposits on myself. "I do not have a clean complex," she said. After insulting her lamp, I didn't want to reject her towel, which was white and rooster patterned, so I wiped my hands even though my fingers weren't dirty or dripping anymore. I had no idea this was acting up. I didn't notice anything was wrong. "Have you checked your water bill?" "Have I what?" "Your water bill. It might be high, depends on how long you've had this leak." "Well, I don't know." I rose from my knees and walked without her back down the hallway, past the unsecured money and out the door and out to the van to retrieve the better device. From outside, I eyed the empty spot in the window. It was just a dark area with the lamp not there. I wondered if a neighbor passed by, would the room seem like a different place? The furniture was still visible, but it looked as if she had begun moving out. Or I don't know, that the neighbors' houses were farther away, which of course was nonsense. And anyway, they already were far away because it was that kind of neighborhood. Still, I could imagine someone driving down this street at night and missing turning into the driveway because the familiar window didn't look the same because the lamp wasn't there. Thinking that thought, it jogged my memory of driving in here earlier and not seeing it, the unique marker. What could I do? Maybe I could find online an identical fake as a replacement, some cheap match, because the darkness was my responsibility. I grabbed a new flapper, but also my stepladder and a pack of 60-watt bulbs and carried the equipment inside. The coffee table needed to be angled out of the way in order to position the ladder below the overhead. I spread the legs and set the bulbs on the tray. Then I walked back to her in the bathroom. I told her what I was doing. I explained every step. Some of my customers are really interested in the whole operation. After I connected the chain to the lever, it took me a couple of pushes on the flusher before I measured out the correct chain length. The attachment needed to be loosened. I'll stop there, even the scene keeps going on, but I'll stop there. Now.
Hey, well, I'll try to speak loudly and we can
turn it. We can do this.
No, I don't want to go. So,
Go
really?
back and forth.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was terrific. It is the beginning of for those who haven't read the book, it's the beginning of a new relationship that and a mystery that's set in motion. Millie is a character for the record books. She is an extraordinary character. A lot to say, and we have the chance to hear from Stephen about his thoughts as he was writing the book. I just want to say thank you for letting me come into this situation. Wonderful to see the book finished. I had the privilege of seeing it in various drafts. And it's so exciting to have a finished copy now. Also to be here at Writers and Books many years ago, long before some of you were born. I arrived in Rochester in the mid-'80s, chasing my boyfriend, and who became my husband. I chased him up to Rochester. I had no employment. We got the first apartment in the Flatiron building right next door. And I came over to Writers and Books and asked for a job, basically. It was my first job. I taught a class here, a workshop. So it's wonderful. Did I ever conceive that I would be sitting here so many years later talking to my colleague about his book? So really amazing thing time is, and you capture that in your book, the way we think about time. The book tells us a lot about the end of life. It's very sensitively done in its portrayal of dementia. I did want to ask you, since we're in Rochester, and the book is set in Rochester, as you mentioned, many of us will recognize some key sites, neighborhoods, names. But I'm curious, did you have to do any research? Did you have to do any learning in order to get the information that you needed to establish the setting, the local setting?
I feel like when I, wrote a novel before this, Bluff City Pawn, set in Memphis, I feel like there was a lot more of things that I had to do to feel like I could write that book that was set in Memphis. I think that this one felt that I was still doing a lot of research, and I can talk about the research I did, but I'm not quite sure if I felt like I need to do this research because I really need to know what Rochester is, more that I need to do this research to really understand who these two characters are and like what the arc is that they're taking. So, and which is to say that I don't know if Rochester is as much maybe as a character as it might be, as Memphis might be in the first book, but the research I did, I just get in these weird, I don't know, I've started to think that there are problems, and maybe it's something inherently reflecting the curiosity that I have when I write, of sort of like learning something outside myself, because not a handyman, very much not.
Right. You sound like one though.
So first of all, so for Dawn, I talked to a lot of handymen, like at least a half dozen. Some were, one person we would get together for coffee and breakfast, and I would ask him, well, what'd you do this week? Talk about what he did, and just how was that, and what were the challenges, and you just inevitably just kind of getting a sense of like the day, the rhythm of the day. And someone else, I went to Lowe's to just kind of see how he kind of supplied up in the morning. Other people was just phone calls, like literally just went online or got names, called people. Sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it was interesting, I went to a number of senior centers. I went to, I'm not sure how I found that. Maybe I went to Lifespan, and then they gave me some information. And then I started popping into some senior centers in Irondequoit and Webster. And I met a woman who was doing a lot of work with her mom, who was in her early 90s at that time. And I'm still friendly with her. I sort of would talk to her a little bit over the course of the book. And then some things happen, just in my own life that kind of put me, that where I was a witness to certain things that were going on in the kind of the trajectory of Millie's, and then, just her emotions, her vocabulary and things like that. So it was a little bit of combination of all of that. None of it, ultimately, well, you would know this, it's giving you, it's like, it's giving you bits of language, possible scenarios. It's not really giving you a narrative arc. It was certainly not giving me anything of Don's backstory and like who he was and what he was bringing into the to this as someone was married, had stepkids, doesn't really know what his relationship is with his stepkids now that he's divorced. But I think that I did appreciate some of I think I felt like I could write him as like someone coming into somebody's house. You know?
Absolutely. I would trust you to change a
And
paper.
I would, yeah, I did do a toilet repair somewhat haphazardly a few days ago. A few days ago, it did involve masking tape at one point. So, but those are the things that stick out at me when if I go through the and then I mean I was talking to I talked to some folks who work in geriatric care, who work in end-of-life care, hospice care, some folks at the U of R, social workers, you know, just sort of thinking about that's for later portions of the book too. So yeah.
So for those who haven't read the whole book, I don't want to talk exactly
Right.
about the ending, but I will say you've mentioned this word arc, and it has quite a marvelous logical arc to it. And so I'm wondering what I don't know. I'm trying to retrace our own conversations as you were writing it, but to what extent did you have your plan? Did you have the conception of the book from the start?
I think I had so this was a weird book in that I'm not a weird book, but I remember when I finished it and first Joanna reads everything of mine like in draft form. And so, I mean, you read the first 100 pages and then you read it when I first thought I was done, which was like, I thought it was a very slim 180-page book. And I remember thinking to myself, hey, I think I'm getting faster at this, you know, because I had finished it a few years quicker than the first book, even though it was shorter than the first book. I was like, doesn't count. It's a novel again. So, and it had a somewhat similar ending. Like I think I understood what was going to happen to Millie and roughly sort of where Dawn would be. But the journey that he was going to take and the filling in of her life, things that I had, I think, kind of written more flatly about her. Oh, her marriage was perfect, or that evolved through like really interrogating what does this moment mean to him? What are all the implications of it? So sometimes it was discovering pieces that were not in the book itself. I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but like even different characters, different side characters. But other parts were like, okay, Dawn getting in the car and driving Millie to the supermarket is not a negligible thing. If you think about it long enough, that carries like all of this emotion, like all of this emotion, like literally, what is it like for him to sit in the seat that she may have sat in, that maybe the husband may have sat in earlier? Who is he at that moment? Like what? So I think just trying to find like what was within a moment that maybe I had written too quickly about. So that came out more in the revisions, I hope.
Absolutely. So. And the book, I don't know if this was in the early draft, but I have been pondering it since reading the finished book. The attention to intent that comes up, and I think I can read just a very quick little passage to steer us toward this question. Actually, this is an old. I found this bookmark from the Park Avenue bookstore. Does anybody remember that? Really?
Yeah, I have one of those.
No one here remembers the old Park Ave bookstore? See that?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how you have it.
I don't know.
Yeah,
it must have been in a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So here, thinking about intent. Don says, I tended to talk more to myself at nighttime. One night, a word I wrestled with was intent.
Right.
Intent, I said innocently, stupidly, dumb wordplay, like something misheard over the phone. But I knew I shouldn't play with such a word.
Right.
And then he reflects on this word intent. It's actually a word I have been thinking about in the adjective form, intentional. And I want to ask you about your thoughts
Right.
regarding this, regarding the character Don, who goes into the house, buys the lamp, and that sets in motion a novel's worth of intense
Right.
story.
Right.
And he's wondering about intent.
Right.
So I want to ask about intent. What do you think,
Right.
in you reflecting back at the beginning, this character,
Right.
what
Right,
level,
Yeah, go ahead.
what level of intent,
Right.
to what extent is he responsible for
Right.
the intention
Right.
that leads to
Yeah.
a series of
Yeah.
very consequential actions?
Take this back. So, one other, so I have to say that in some ways that statement kind of came about through research, in that when I went way at the beginning of the book, researching the book, I talked to someone who, well, I can name him, Art Mason. He worked at Lifespan. I think he's retired now, but he basically dealt with elder abuse, And I asked, and this was like at the early formation of my book, when I was really trying to, like, I didn't know who Don was. I was like, what's his angle? What do I want the angle to be? And I asked him, I said, well, if I told you, I was sort of playing around with like a scenario of the book. I said, if I told you this story, what would you think of it? He said, it would all come down to intent. And so I kind of filed it away. And I actually later on in the drafting had Don ask himself that question. I think that for me, I'm not going to answer part of the question you're going to ask, because I'll explain why, but like, I feel like the book is hopefully about a lot of things, and relationships and aging and memory and work and money and all this. But like, I feel like if I had to put the story like almost on a grid visually for me, or like a line, it's if I took like these two extremes of the book, like what could the book be at its most positive or negative? The negative is like, am I reading a story about a scam artist? Am I reading a story of someone who's taking advantage? And then all the way on the other side, like, am I reading a story that's like almost like a surrogate family love story? And I feel like for me, the book, what I hope is that it really moves, like within those, and even within moments of the story, where you're sort of saying like, okay, Don, you're doing this. Oh, wow. But then look how deep he's going with her. And that maybe even the things you thought at the beginning are challenged by what happens at the end. The thing about what I read is, it's almost like, I almost don't want to answer it. This could be frustrating. I mean, I could imagine being the audience and this would be frustrating, but like, I almost don't want to answer it, because like, I'm almost more curious what people feel when they read it. Is sort of like, what's he doing?
Yeah.
And if I told you what he was doing, like, I'm not even so sure I would want to necessarily believe it, because I would have a feeling I would oversimplify it, But I feel like everyone's going to bring their own sense already of like what he could be doing. And I'm kind of happy with that.
Well, I wonder, looking out at the audience, after these first chapters, if you haven't read the book, are you seeing a scam artist? Are you seeing someone who's going to be helpful? Too soon to tell. Okay, so it could be either, right? And that is part of the Stephen's control of suspense. I find it in all his work. He's able to keep us on edge without really knowing we're on edge. So that's part of the satisfaction of reading your work. Also, I want to add in that as you were making your inquiries in all sorts of different places to gather information, gather ballast for the book. Think about language. You end up coming up with fabulous sentences for Millie, and maybe these stuck out to you when you were listening to the first sections. I have enough bills to wallpaper the world, or my nickname is slow motion, or I can't hear stones. And that I can imagine that part of the thrill of writing this book was, as you were discovering Don's intent, exploring it, you were discovering what Millie could do with language.
Definitely.
And that was coming up, changing all the way through the book. That's an extraordinary thing about the book, that he can take sentences like that and keep them moving and changing. So you want to comment on that? That's more of a remark than a question.
Oh, no, thanks. I mean, yeah, I feel like the story of kind of what comes out of her mouth, is like the kind of I don't know, at times I was sort of like just amazed at just like her, some of it could be beautiful, terrifying, confused. I mean, those three lines, two of them I made up. The one about, I was sitting at, I think it was like the Pittsburgh YMCA when our kids, I think at one point we went over there, they were taking a swim class or something. And this woman sat down, it's actually 2 seats in the lobby, and she just had her purse. And she just started taking out everything from her purse. I think she said something close to the wallpaper of the world kind of woman. And even the title.
Good thing you weren't Don.
That's right. How's your house? I mean, the title is something that I kind of formed out of something Ella said at a very young age. She's just saying about she was 4 or 5 years old, my daughter, and she was trying to figure out like why the room, the hall, this corridor of Eastman, the Eastman Theater, why it was so loud. And I was trying to explain the acoustics and vaulted ceiling and tile or whatever, and she just said something like, it's made a noise. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And the title of the book for like a year was The Lady with the Lamp. It was just this like, what? Like this 40s like screwball comedy, like what is that? And I knew it didn't work, but it was just a placeholder. And then just somehow that thing popped in my head. This room is made of noise. So yeah, I feel like she's almost like a language within the language.
Yeah,
of the book,
and it allows you as a writer to do such interesting things with vocabulary and syntax, metaphor, symbolism. Really wonderful. And that the presence in terms of symbolism, the presence of the darkness at the beginning, and her sense that of course it's a lamp, it couldn't be a replica,
right?
That has such import at the end of the book. So hopefully incentive for everybody to read the whole book. I want to make sure we have time to open it up for any questions you might have. So is there any or comments, anything you want to?
I'm curious as to your decision to make this, first person. Was that ever
It was it was always first person. It's interesting because the thing I'm writing now started out as first person. I'm in like a novel in progress, so I'm pretty early into it, but I've already made a huge recalibration where if the book started out as a first person point of view from this one woman's perspective, and now it's third person point of view from the other person. So that was like a huge shift to like switch who's the protagonist and also like what's the point of view. I mean, I think it's whenever, whenever we, I'm sure, teach classes, it's probably like the most fundamental decision that you make, or I don't know if it's a decision or it decides you, or whatever, but like whatever you do, like that has such implications for voice and information and tone. And so I mean, there have been times, I suppose, where I have used first person in a persona, in sort of like, okay, here's this person that's like really not me, not a handyman, not everything about, well, 95% of things about him are not my life, like his past, his history. So maybe first person is a way of sort of saying, well, I'm you, Don, I'm you. So I don't remember having any instinct to tell it in another way before that voice. It may have also been, Rick, just like the book I wrote before, it was third person, so it like just may have been a way to, it's like, okay, I'm already dealing with like what's up with me with like people in rooms and like, so I'm like, I'll make sure this is different, so it starts off, it's a little weird because, I wrote this pawn shop book and then suddenly there's like this buying and selling.
Yeah.
I was happy that it, kind of moved elsewhere after that, but yeah.
Although, doesn't it want to make you keep an eye out for at sales and
Yeah, right. I don't think we have any,
sidewalk sales and things for that special lamp?
that special lamp.
Yeah.
I actually have a thank you for the meeting question about Eastman being the one made of noise, but it's probably questioned by a lot.
Yeah. Right.
And then we hear about the man, that it's all about nights.
That's right.
And it's really such a visceral
Yeah.
and gentle intrigue that, so I'm really curious.
Right. So I think right. So that's, I mean, not only did I like just the room has made a noise seem like a more interesting phrase than the lady with the lamp, which seemed to like signal a different kind of book. But right, at first it was like, oh, wait, is this book about elimination? Is that why? But I think I saw A Room is Made of Noise as functioning on like a few different levels. Like on the one level, it is about volume. He comes into this room, there's she has hearing aids, there's a loud TV going on. There's also these kinds of fights that he's had in his past life, his family. And so, that then kind of gets to like noise almost as kind of memory, as sort of, kind of thinking about like, so I guess there's sort of two levels in which the room is almost like a chamber in his mind, where one chamber I think is about dementia. But then I think the other is just about memory and discord, and, one of the things that he's really trying to understand is how did this woman get through the entirety of her life married? And I, Dawn, I come from this, I come from this one home and then this is what I did, I cheated. And I think he's just trying to understand that issue of fidelity. And so I think he's, on the one hand, like it's her noise that he's coming into, but I think he's also sort of bringing his own kind of chaos. So it's just the word. Yeah, it really felt like it connected with a lot of like the searching elements of the book, more than the other thing did.
We have a question. Oh, sorry. We have a question in the chat.
The chat, there's a question online. We are, yeah.
The question is, what surprised you in writing the book?
What surprised me? Hmm. Well, I mean, I'm continuing to be surprised on how the book is weirdly connecting with certain things that happened to me in my life now. So there's just that as a book. I think what surprised me. It's a really good question. I guess sometimes it surprises you how hard it is to write. You know, I mean, just to the things that I sit down here and act like I've really understood about it. Like there's this whole other story, which is like, it takes years to like, and to find some of the most base, like just like core pieces of the book, you know? So I think sometimes I'm sometimes just so surprised about how humbling it can be to write, you know, that writing a book. Well, I don't know, maybe Joanna, I'm curious what you feel about it, but like, I suppose the process you kind of can learn to master on some level, like just the sitting down, the approach to it, but just the level of how many things you have to figure out that are intrinsic to just that project, that the figuring out of all these other things that you figured out years before in another book are not necessarily guiding you, you know, because they're their own, you know. Dawn exists in a space that isn't coming from something I wrote before. So I guess I was surprised when sometimes just the level of what he was carrying maybe in his life, like what it would be like for him to go back to his house, his childhood house. So those were like good surprises.
I'm just going to add here that one of the accomplishments of the book is to take familiar settings for those of us in Rochester, concerns for those of us who live and die, and there are a few of us who do that,
Right.
and make them newly visible, and that has impressed me. In my own work, I tend to theatricalize it. I tend to move away from the familiar. But I sense in your process, really with both the books, that once you're in a project, you're able to look around in daily life and be surprised. You know, just antenna are up. You're paying attention, and it's partly governed by the project. So you're on the alert for certain things.
And I don't know if you're like this too, but I could flip through 20 pages of the dictionary when I'm writing, you know, and I could find a word and I'm like, I know where that word can go, you know, like, so it's like, you know, like where it can just be like, and I mean, and what I mean by that is that I can see how that word might be a better word than the other word that I use, or like, yeah, you hear something. I don't know. I was at the public market, but you can't do this until you're writing. But you know, like that you've not created something. But it's like I was at the public market and I met some guy. He was selling stuff, and he just said something about, I can't remember how we started talking about him or did I recognize him. And he said something like, yeah, like I have generic face number 10. I'd be good for robbing banks or something. Like, and I was like, just write that down, because that's and I could already see a scene coming around it, and it's set in the book.
Roughing it easy.
Well, that was when we took an RV trip And the guy next to us was a big RVer, and that's what he called RV trips, roughing it smooth.
Roughing it smooth.
Roughing it smooth. That's right. Yeah, I do love what people say. I mean, that's true. I'm constantly interested in listening to what people have to say. Yeah. Which is weird then to be talking, right? So, I'm talking.
Maybe
a
that's
lot.
a good
I'm
point.
talking a lot about what other people say.
Hear what people have to say in the reception after.
Right,
Words.
right, yeah.
So, okay.
There, I think,
I was just gonna comment on what you said, because I love the title so much. And I love hearing that it was your daughter that said it. I love Millie's language. I love when she was just, it felt like she was always speaking these incredibly beautiful things that I loved. But I feel like I live in a room of noise. Like I feel like the world.
Right,
Is noise,
yeah,
right?
right.
Like, the world is noise. It's always noise. And Don is always trying to figure out what's real. Is the lamp real? Is my relationship real? Is this real?
right,
Like, am I hearing or
Right.
not? Right? So like,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I think of the a room of noise. Like,
Yeah.
okay, how do I get?
yeah.
How do I explain
So
on that?
you're right. It's true. It did feel like just on some level, like a thing that we kind of all feel like is maybe a little bit wrong with the way we live. Like maybe it's just like how do I get it a little quieter? But I actually I don't want to say I had to fight for the title, but it was not a title. When the press accepted the book, they did not say we want this title. The editor was like, I'm not sure about it. No, wait, that's not true. It was earlier. It was in the when I was still trying to revise it for them to accept it. He was like, I'm not quite sure what it means yet in terms of the book. And the one thing that did come out a little bit later was, and this is something, I don't know if there's a lot of doublings or repetitions in the book. It's like if you, that once something kind of happens with Don, it often kind of reverberates and becomes an echo or something like life. And so I think in an earlier version of the book, I won't say, but like the line appears, but I think it's possible that you could have just sort of missed it. But there's like one or two other instances that follow it that kind of, I think, build upon that concept enough so that, yeah. And now it's like, oh, I'm so glad, because I do is whatever qualms I have with the book, like I'm really glad that the title is the book, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.